Thank you, Maria, and thanks for inviting me to this important event. And I'll also be showing some slides and just make sure I can do that. So hopefully we're on.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Maria, and great to be here. I'll move directly to first slide because as several have alluded to, what we see, of course, with COVID-19 affecting everyone around the world, and social distancing, keeping millions at home, has placed significant demands on the infrastructure. But it's important to emphasize that telecom networks so far have stood up well to the task. As people spent more time online at home, network traffic loads shifted geographically from city centers and office areas to suburban residential areas. And the largest share of the traffic increase as lockdowns went into place was absorbed by the fixed residential network, but many service providers also experienced an increased demand on the mobile network. And what you see on this slide is actually the change traffic pattern happening in the Paris region. And as connectivity, as many of previous speakers have emphasized, is now a must-have for all the economy and society. This issue is and should be front and center of policymakers' concerns. We therefore strongly welcome the recent Council conclusions on shaping Europe's digital future, calling on the European Commission and Member States to improve investments in accelerating the deployment of networks capable of offering gigabit connectivity. So I would like to introduce to you the latest edition of Ericsson's mobility report that was published only a few weeks ago. And this is a regular forecast we conduct twice a year looking forward to the next 5 years. And in this edition, we take a more detailed look also at the role of networks and digital infrastructures in keeping societies running and helping to keep us all connected when we have to stay apart. Some of the main findings, well, first, and I think it's obvious to all of us, digital infrastructure is critical to meeting communication needs in times of crisis, as is the COVID-19. And secondly, I mean, 5G was made for innovation. Despite the uncertainty caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, providers continue to invest and switch on 5G around the world. And we actually upped the forecast for number of 5G subscriptions by the end of the year to 190 million, partly driven by China, but also many other markets. By 2025, we forecast 2.8 billion mobile subscriptions on 5G, which also in terms of coverage means that we expect that 5G will cover up to 65% of the world population by that year. However, and as was already indicated, short-term factors point to slower pace in certain countries, for example, delays in licensing of 5G spectrum due to COVID-19. But nevertheless, 5G is still expected to be the fastest deployed mobile communication technology in history. And lastly, fixed wireless access connections, and it's the first time we actually include that in our report. They are forecast to account for 25% of global mobile network data traffic by the end of 2025. And you may have heard a lot lately about the potential of fixed wireless access, including from BEREC, who recognize it as a very high capacity network with capabilities to contribute significantly to Europe's gigabit connectivity, very much in parallel to fiber build out. But also speaking about the short-term factors and a slower pace in certain countries in Europe, we can see on this graph, comparing the different regions around the world, that Europe will partly suffer from the delays across Europe in licensing of 5G spectrum. And you can see that Europe, both Central Eastern and Western Europe, will be behind both Northeast Asia, which includes China, and North America in the uptake of 5G. And to this end, of course, EU policymakers, and as was emphasized by Enrico as well, must continue to encourage member states to remove barriers for such investments, access to sites, for example, and of course to award 5G spectrum frequencies by the end of this year. This in order to secure a timely deployment of high-capacity network infrastructures all over Europe. But we should also like to take this opportunity to highlight 5G's importance in delivering carbon neutral growth, which echoes the European ambition of a twin transition. It should be both green and digital. And for each new generation, as we've seen in the past on mobile networks, energy consumption has actually increased significantly. But on the one hand, the 5G standard is the most energy efficient ever. And what is important, we can do even more from industry side. And Ericsson has developed a unique model for building 5G networks in a different way, helping communication service providers reduce energy consumption. And we believe this is not only an option, it's an industry responsibility. And of course, if you would like to learn more about our insights into how industry can achieve this new reality, I invite you to read our report, Breaking the Energy Curve, that we published in March of this year. But what we see, and I'll guess Enrico talked a lot about that as well, is that 5G will unlock the digitization of ecosystems, everything from healthcare to agriculture. And this slide also includes an effort to quantify the revenue potential for service providers by 2030, that is. So I would say we see 5G as the most important part of the evolving digital infrastructure, requiring focused attention and investments to support digital transformation across different ecosystems. And without this investment happening first, much of the benefit will simply not be realized. And we also understand that the ecosystems matrix applies to the recovery funds assessment of where investments are required. So just to conclude that 5G, as we see it, has an exponential potential in restarting economies and building societal resilience, building our new and better normal underpinned by connectivity. And investments in digital infrastructure will need to come first before much of the innovation on top can happen. Connectivity is a fundamental prerequisite of digitizing our economies. But of course, we will also need collaboration with governments to address key economic and societal challenges, like connecting the unconnected, connecting the SMEs, as we heard about from Ivan as well, thereby taking the growth and prosperity from digitization much further into our European population and our European companies. So thank you. Happy to come back then in the panel discussion.